Is that your security guard behind you? The gun behind you?
That's not the gun.
That's not a gun? What is it? I won't ask you again then.
They'll hurt you when they have to.
They or you? As a journalist, if I'm trying to get into these clubs and see how they operate,
I would say good luck.
it's the military. They're covering their faces, which is never good. How often is it that you have cameras filming?
Never.
Do you think there's a race war coming?
I hope so.
Are you a Nazi?
I've been doing it all my life. I'll do it till I'm laid in the casket.
It seems to me like there's a fire spreading. Do you think it's too late to stop this?
Well, everybody involved is making money.
So it goes really deep. Do you work with the cartel?
I might say nothing.
Do you trust these people?
They look at you as prey.
People want to kill you for asking questions. So they kill the whole empire.
We gotta move.
The black market will be here as long as the legal market keeps screwing up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Brennan, moderator of CBS's Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan and Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for CBS News. And today I am thrilled to speak with Peabody and DuPont Award-winning journalist Mariana van Zeller in a conversation presented by the 92nd Street Y. So thank you all for watching. This 10-part second season of Trafficked with Mariana van Zeller premiered last month on National Geographic. And Mariana and I will discuss season 2's exploration of the world's most dangerous black markets. The topics are pretty incredible and pretty exhilarating. And armed with National Geographic's trademark inside access, each episode follows Mariana as she explores the inner workings of the world's multi-trillion-dollar shadow economy. Among the topics are romance scams, a meth superhighway, black market plastic surgery, black market for marijuana, white supremacy, cocaine queens, and Amazon mafia. The finale of season 2 of Trafficked airs February 2nd at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Pacific on National Geographic. Episodes are also available to stream on Hulu, and filming for the 3rd season is underway, which means, Mariana, you're a very busy woman. Thank you for joining us.
Just like you, Margaret. Thanks for having me.
I so enjoyed watching your episodes here, and it really was astounding to me because 45 minutes of work is what the public sees, but you have been putting in a lot behind the scenes because these are really kind of mini documentaries, each episode. Can you explain to people watching, what is that editorial process like? How do you even choose the topics?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think the topics are chosen according to how relevant they are, how likely it is that we gain access, although that usually at the end of the list, because in all of these access is never guaranteed, and is oftentimes we start with the idea that it is the hardest part of our jobs. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's so much work put into it, each of these. I'd say that it's months, sometimes even years of trying to gain access to these worlds. And then we are pre-producing before we even hit the ground for 3-4 months for each episode, and then filming and then editing for another 3 to 4 months. So it's every single episode is almost a year of work, but we're doing 10 simultaneously at all times.
So you're ping-ponging between topics for you. You have to keep it all straight, reporting-wise.
Yeah. Yep.
One of the ones that I enjoyed watching the most was about white supremacy. And this was, I think, a bit surprising because you don't think of that as a trafficking network, but you approached it as essentially a network trafficking in ideology and in ideas rather than buying and selling things. You actually even went from the US to Ukraine to look at how white supremacists and white nationalists are being radicalized and actually learning some pretty frightening tactics. What did you find in the course of reporting that?
Yeah, I would say, it was, I think, the scariest episode of the season for me, reporting on it. I knew I wanted to do a story about the rise in white supremacy, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And when we started looking into it and realizing that actually it very much fits into what we call a black market, because although these people and these groups, we tend to think of them as operating almost sort of lone wolves whenever we talk about these white supremacy attacks, whether they happen in El Paso or New Zealand or Norway. I think we in the media tend to classify them as lone wolf attacks. And one of the things that we found in our reporting is that they are very far from lone wolf attacks. They very much operate, these groups and these people, they operate, they are inspired, they're learning. Sometimes they go as far as training with other groups. They're very much connected, and they operate very much like a trafficking network. But like you said, instead of putting drugs in people's bodies or guns in people's hands, they're putting hateful ideology in people's minds.
But they are self-radicalized is essentially it, but because of this internet access to this network.
Yeah. We spent time with a former skinhead, a man who had been radicalized in the early 90s. And it was really interesting to see, he was full of hate. He was radicalized when he was 16 years old. His name is Christian Picciolini. He now focuses a lot of his work on de-radicalization, on trying to reach some of these white supremacist extremists and trying to get them out of the movement. And one of the things he says, one of the most dangerous things that happen, or evolutions that have happened since he was a kid out on the streets, committing hate crimes, is that now these kids, when they're becoming radicalized, they have at their hands a 24-hour hate buffet. That's how he put it. Which is the internet. And you are seeing, you're seeing them, they're learning, they're becoming inspired. What we found, for example, with the shooter in El Paso, Texas, that killed 27 Americans, was that he actually had, they found him after the authorities found that he had carried with him parts of a manuscript that were influenced and inspired by the manuscript that was used by the shooter in New Zealand. So again, they are all connected. They're sort of inspired by one another, and they're also teaching each other on what to do. And if you go as far as we went in our investigation of going all the way to Ukraine and finding out that a lot of Americans are actually traveling to Ukraine and training to be able to come back to America and commit, terrorist attacks.
I thought it was fascinating because it reminded me of reporting that I had done about ISIS and, what a sort of diffused threat that was. It seems like the same model.
Absolutely. In fact, they are using what we heard is that they are using the handbook that is out there online that was made by ISIS and for ISIS fighters on how to train, on how to build bombs, on how to recruit. They're using exactly the same techniques that were used by ISIS, but these aren't, foreigners wanting to attack America. These are actually American-born people wanting to attack other Americans.
So for each episode, you are a character. You're reporting sort of and explaining as you report to the camera while you're doing your interviews. You are part of this storytelling in a really direct way. How did you make that choice, and how does that impact the relationships you have to build with the people that you speak to on camera and getting them to agree to speak on camera in the first place?
Getting them to agree is definitely the hardest part of my job. I think that the reason they say yes, most people don't see, but for every yes we get dozens, sometimes even hundreds of no's. They only see the easy part, which is when we actually sit down for the interview. But I think partly is one of the most important things for me as a journalist is to approach every subject matter and everybody that I interview with empathy and no judgment. And I always say that I'm here really to try to understand your story, to listen to you. And I'm not here to judge. And I think that goes a long, long way. That's not always easy when you're interviewing, American neo-Nazis, for example. Right. Obviously very hard. But I do think that, one of the main goals of this show is to try to help our viewers connect with people that at first glance they have nothing in common with. And that's something that I've learned through working on Trafficked, is that no matter how far into the edges of our society you travel, that you can still find people that are relatable and redeemable, that more often than not, the traffickers, the smugglers, the criminals are people just like you and I, that have dreams and aspirations. They have kids, they are our neighbors. But most often than not, it is because of a lack of opportunity and inequality that they, become involved in the lives that they do and the crimes that they do. And that's been a really sort of eye-opening experience for me.
That's a really interesting way of putting it, empathy. I mean, do you find, certainly in my line of journalism, it's very different, but you sometimes get backlash with, how could you even talk to someone like that? How could you platform someone like that? Do you worry about that when you sit down and talk to one of these traffickers and have empathy that in some way it's helping them, rather than doing what you were intending, which is to explore and to understand?
I think my intention is not only to inform, but to create sort of connections. Because I think without creating those connections, people don't care. And without caring, people won't make any changes in the world. So part of my job, I see, as a journalist, it is to inform, but it is also to get people to care. And so that's why that part is so important for me. However, there are moments, when we did a story about fentanyl trafficking, and the whole pipeline of fentanyl from Mexico, from Sinaloa all the way to the United States. And there was a moment that I will never forget. I've been reporting on the opiate crisis since almost the beginning of my career for many years, and had spent, many hours and days with, particularly with mothers of victims, with people who died from fentanyl overdoses. And there was a moment while filming that episode that I'm crossing the border with a mother who was actually pregnant at the time, and she was carrying 5 kilos of fentanyl in the back of her car. And I'm crossing with her and I'm filming it. And I'm also explaining what is happening, what I'm witnessing, and also what I'm feeling. And at the moment, I felt enormous guilt there was a part of me that I had, spent the day before with this woman. I knew she was a mother. I knew she was expecting a new child. And my heart was going out to her family. Part of me, I felt bad. I am connecting and I'm feeling sort of very conflicted at this moment because my head is constantly going back to all those mothers that I've spent time with who've lost their loved ones to fentanyl. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of moments of conflict.
Mm-hmm. And you do talk about and have some sort of interesting observations in the course of your reporting that I think could surprise the audience. I mean, when you were talking about Black markets and marijuana, in the course of your reporting, you're saying actually legalization has amplified the illicit marketplace rather than making it, sidelined or really shrinking it down. Tell me about that discovery on Black market marijuana.
It was really shocking. I live in California. I've lived here for many years now. I was here during legalization. I've seen how it's changed and how there's what we think is a legal dispensary in every corner in Los Angeles. And to find out that actually, the Black market for marijuana is 4 times bigger than the legal market for marijuana in the state of California alone is crazy. And how most of the marijuana, the weed that is trafficked around the United States actually comes from California. And I think it's partly when legalization in the state of California, when it comes to weed, it came with just so much burden put upon those who were trying to legalize their businesses. Mm-hmm. It is so expensive. It is so difficult to gain these licenses that a lot of people would just preferred to stay in the illegal business. I will never forget the scene that we filmed at the rooftop of a building in downtown Los Angeles, where we drove up to the top of the building and it was a parking garage and they're operating pretty much what looked like a Costco of illegal weed. And everybody out in the open. That's one thing that's surprising about these trafficking markets and these Black markets is that very often they happen in plain sight. We tend to think of them happening in sort of dungeons or dark corners, but they're actually happening in plain sight. And that we've come across that again and again.
And in that, you also found that it's not just domestic growers. This was really interesting to me that you found there is an illicit Chinese network within the marijuana being sold in California. Can you explain that international connection? It's not just Mexican cartels.
Yeah, that there's there's Chinese triads involved in marijuana grows. That they are indoor grows. That is very much it's a market that has been cornered, from what we hear, also from law enforcement, by these Chinese groups and Chinese families. A lot of them who come to California to exploit this sort of very profitable business. That was absolutely shocking to me.
And what do you hope in the course of your reporting, when you come to the conclusion of a story like that, like, do you hope that there is a policy change? Do you hope that it is just eye-opening for the audience member themselves? I mean, you talked a bit about intention, but what is your hope that people walk away from some of these episodes with?
I think sharing the discovery of information, as journalists, that is our goal always, is to find and to share the information with the public, with the government, with society, so that they can make the right choices with the information we've provided them. And then another part of the job that I do that I find, and I talked a little bit about this, is the connection. Again, it's because only if we care will we be willing to make any change in the world. And I go back to that on Trafficked. It is incredibly dangerous sometimes to connect with people, that are, the most ostracized and most, at the furthest edges of our society. And yet it is important, because if we don't understand their motivations, we will never be able to stop these black markets from existing.
Mm-hmm. And you use technology as well to allow for people to share their stories. People who don't, it is difficult to get people to agree to go on camera. Often they'll tell you something off camera, they'll tell a print reporter, but getting someone to sit down and reveal something that they know is illegal and that they're directly involved in is another level of difficulty. Tell me about some of the ways you've navigated that. I know you've used voice distortion. Are there other innovations that you've had to adopt?
Yeah, we take the protection of our sources very seriously. I would say that the vast majority of people that agree to talk to us, not all, but the vast majority of them agree to talk to us if we don't disclose their identity, sometimes even their location. So we go to great lengths to make sure that we protect people's identities. There have been situations in which I have also had to use secret cameras and do some undercover filming. It is not my favorite tool. I much prefer to spend months and months convincing somebody to share their stories. But there are situations in which, for example, when we filmed the scam episode for season 1, where in order to gain access into one of these companies in Israel that was, taking part in these financial scams, the only way to do so was with a secret camera. So we have done that in the past. But it's the hardest part. You spend months and months trying to convince people to talk to you, people that don't really have anything to gain from it. But it is, I think the reason why they talk to us is a mix of ego. They want to boast about what they do. These are often the best at doing what they do. They're the best at counterfeiting, at scamming, at making meth. But yet sometimes not even their families know what they do. So that we give them an opportunity behind a mask with a changed voice, a distorted voice, to share their stories. And I think that goes a long way. I think impunity plays a large role as well. These have been people who've been operating in these worlds with almost total impunity. So they don't really see a downside to talking to an international brand like National Geographic. And then the third and most important reason, I think, is really this need that we have, very human need to be understood and to share your story. They know that they're considered the bad guys, the criminals, the traffickers, but they have a story to tell, and they want people to understand them. They want people to understand why they made the life choices they did. And again, with empathy and no judgment, I give them that opportunity.
In the white supremacy episode, you do go into a gathering at one point where it starts to feel unsafe, where the people there start speaking to camera and speaking to you and thinking you're CNN or another journalism organization that they don't trust. Has that ever, particularly in this environment, become a real security risk?
That was a really scary moment for myself and my team. My cameraman was actually attacked. Somebody grabbed onto his camera and then sort of started threatening him and pulling out a knife that they had in their back pocket. That was a gathering of the Proud Boys that happened in Portland around September, October, 2 months before the invasion of the Capitol. A lot of the same people that were there at that gathering were then involved in the invasion of the Capitol on January 6th. And I will never forget just the sort of hate towards the media. I don't think I've experienced anything, quite as heated or open as that. It didn't matter if we were CNN or whatever we were. They just were not happy with the fact that we were journalists. And even though we kept telling them, look, we're here with the permission of the leaders of the Proud Boys, they brought us here, we're with them. And even though some of them actually went as far as the leaders went to tell them that they're here, they're safe, they're with us, a lot of people didn't care. And it's this sort of mob mentality that happens where if one person starts yelling, then everybody around them sort of feels the need to start yelling as well. And it was very scary, but we decided to stay. We were there until the end. And then, 2 months later, what happened, the attack on our democracy. And again, realizing that a lot of the same people were there 2 months later, showed us that, that there's a space like in a show like Trafficked, which is about Black markets, to also be incredibly relevant.
Now, that stood out to me, and you pointed to a man who you interviewed who actually showed up in pictures at the Capitol on January the 6th. You drew a direct line from these white nationalist groups to that attack that day. That's something that still, as a country, we're exploring. So it was interesting that you had that reporting at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And Margaret, they don't call themselves white supremacists, and they take great offense with that description. They call themselves Western chauvinists.
Explain that language. I found that interesting.
They basically believe that the West, which, as we know, is a majority white, is the best. And anything that is outside of the West is weaker and worse. And that anything good that has come in history or in the present and in the future is part of this Western culture. And so they constantly make that differentiation. Although, again, if you look at Western cultures, a majority white. So it is, whatever way you want to call it, it is, a very racist approach to the world.
Mm-hmm. But you do show the different sort of portions of those movements, if you want to use the term a movement, and how they differentiate from each other. Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys versus someone who is more embracing of white supremacist.
Yeah. It's, I think one of the former skinhead that we met with, he told us that what happens with these groups is that although they have a wider reach, because they're more palatable in their language, that they are somewhat of sort of the gateway, almost like a gateway drug into the harder drugs, right? Once you accept a certain language, then it's not difficult to then go down a very dangerous road into becoming more radicalized. And so it's really hard to, I was constantly, while reporting, asking myself, so what is it? Is it more dangerous for there to be, these extremists that openly talk about wanting for there to be a race war and their hate for Blacks and Black people and minorities, or is it more, dangerous to have these groups that are, talk about racism in ways that isn't as outspoken, but are yet, attracting an insane amount of people. I mean, the rally we went to was, thousands of people. So that's really, really scary stuff.
It is, and it's important. Tell me about some of the other things you explored this season, and maybe what wasn't able to pan out that you will be pursuing in the year to come? I mean, how do you decide what makes the cut this year?
I think it was actually an incredible year to film a series like Trafficked. We filmed it during the pandemic. We started filming in June of 2020, so 3 months after we all started quarantining. And what we found as soon as we started reporting was that there has been an explosion in Black markets. You know, whenever there's an economic downturn and people lose their jobs, they have to figure out a way to bring back food for their families. And so there was really an explosion. And then there were certain stories that we did, such as the romance scams episode, which is a crime that almost sort of there was an increase of 300% of romance scamming around the country during the pandemic. So you have these scammers that were essentially, you know, exploiting the loneliest moments of our lives, and so that when we started looking into that and realizing just how much it grew during the pandemic, we realized, okay, this is definitely a story that we want to tackle. But what happens with every season is that you start the season with this long list of ideas, and as you start reporting and going and traveling more around, and as the show starts airing, I get inundated with messages of people with more story ideas. So there's really sort of a never-ending list of Black markets all around us. It's half of the global economy. These Black and gray markets make up for half of the global economy, and yet we know so little about them. So I hope that this series will go for a long, long time.
Well, you've no shortage of topics, but the plastic surgery Black market, that sounds, why would someone choose? What is the motivation for someone to seek plastic surgery that is not completely vetted above board, you know, with a doctor they know? Explain that.
Yeah, it's very often lack of means. I think we live at a time where the way you look, there's an enormous pressure on the way you look, especially as a woman and especially as a young woman, because of social media in great part. And there's a sort of an image of beauty that is almost unattainable. And, you know, for those women who have the means, they can go to a board certified plastic surgery and do whatever they want. And actually, it was part of why it was so important for me to expose myself and talk about how I do Botox, how I have injections on my face twice a year. I go and get Botox, and to show that this is not just affecting a certain, you know, type of person. This pressure is on all of us, and we can sort of all relate to it, whether we want to be open about it or not. But at some point in all your lives, you all relate to the pressure that exists out there. And for a lot of women, they just don't have the means to go to a board certified plastic surgery. So they have to go to, you know, these illegal back alley injections, or to these clinics, these, cheap clinics that exist in Florida, where women are dying on the operating room.
It's terrifying. How did you handle the filming during the pandemic? I know so many of my colleagues have said it just forced innovation for all of us. I mean, you and I, just the way we're talking to each other right now is something we've come to accept as a new way to communicate. But it makes it hard to do field work. It makes it really hard. How did you manage that?
It was hard at the beginning. I mean, we were all unsure. It is already a very dangerous show to produce, to put together. You know, we often put ourselves in dangerous situations. Of course, you know, safety is incredibly important for us, has always been and will always continue to be. But you add to this already sort of dangerous environment, a global pandemic. And, we definitely had a lot of team huddles, making sure that this is what we wanted to do. But as soon as we started reporting, we realized, again, there really had been an explosion and the series was more relevant than ever. And I'm really proud of my team for accomplishing what we did. We did 10 episodes. We're now filming. We filmed 5 episodes for season 3 already. And we've all managed to do it in a very safe way, and kept on reporting.
One of the things
caught COVID, which is crazy.
Really?
Yes.
Good.
One of us caught COVID while filming Trafficked, which is crazy. And we get tested, you know, as you'd expect, once, sometimes several times a week. And none of us ever got COVID while filming Trafficked, which is crazy because we traveled all around the world during the pandemic.
One of the things that in speaking with some of my colleagues, we would all, we fly into war zones, we fly in to do stories, you sit down with these dangerous characters. But with a pandemic, it's different because it's harder to judge the risk. You can't see it.
Mm-hmm. That's
you
absolutely.
don't know when it's there.
Yeah, absolutely right. And also, such an important part of the job that I do is connection. It's having people trust me. And if I have a mask on while talking to them, it's really hard to express emotion and to build that trust and that relationship. So, we did most of the shooting. My team was all masked. And as soon as we'd start the interview, I'd take off my mask and we'd start talking before we even started rolling, actually. And it's a risk that is not there, it's not seen.
When you talk about the importance of being able to connect, I do find that it's different. It's wonderful to be able to get someone up on a Zoom screen, and we become accustomed to it. But there is something you miss in terms of personal cues, in someone's vibe, their body language, the eye contact. You really do need to sit across from someone for a very difficult conversation.
100%. I know. It's also what makes TV journalism so difficult, is because we can't just rely on a phone call. We have to film. Not only do we have to actually sit across the person and talk to them in person, but we also have to film usually part of their world. If they're running guns, we often ask them, we want to see that. We want to see you packing the guns. We want to see how you do, what you do when you're trafficking the guns or the drugs or whatever, or when you're scamming. All that is part of the show and part of the ask. But I do think that if you, more often than not, when you approach people wherever they are in the world or whatever it is that they do, that if you treat them with respect and with dignity, and if you show them that you're there really as their peer to listen to their stories, it goes such a long way, and it really helps. And I think that's something that we as women have as a quality, this ability to empathize, and I've used that to my advantage in my job always.
I agree with that. There is something that can be disarming, I think, and you've probably found this, about sometimes it helps to be underestimated. Let's put it 100%.
We use gender bias to our advantage, Margaret, always. We're seen as less threatening. We also approach our subjects with more empathy. And, I'm often surrounded by men. It's a world that's very dominated mainly by men, where gender bias is just all around me. I'm often in places where women have never been, meth labs and other situations like that. And it is about using that to your own advantage, and it's come in very handy for me.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the cocaine queens.
I love that episode so much. One of the things that I started hearing when the pandemic began was how more and more women were getting involved in the drug business. So immediately that caught my attention. Again, for somebody who's been reporting in these worlds, particularly the drug business, for so long, it is very rare that you see women in any position, and let alone in leadership positions. So when I heard that there were some women that were actually sort of controlling certain favelas, certain slums in Rio, and some that were actually leading some cartels and groups, drug groups in Colombia, I knew that this was a story we had to tell. And so we traveled from Brazil to Colombia looking for these cocaine queens, and it was incredible. It's again, I think, not hard to empathize with some of the things, the challenges that as women they have to go through. For so many years, they saw that they lacked the opportunities, much like their male peers, but their male peers, unlike them, always had this. They always had the drug business to fall back to, whether it's in the favelas of Brazil or in the mountains of Colombia, and they were not given those chances. And a lot of the women that I spoke to were actually single mothers whose husband had abandoned them, and that was really the only way that they could bring money back for their families. A lot of them had been employed, lost their jobs. and sort of found themselves in this position. And so, very much what is happening, a parallel as what is happening around the world is also happening in black markets. It takes a little longer, but it gets there. But, the reverse of that, the reverse of the coin, the other side of the coin is that it's also incredibly dangerous. So, Sonia, which is the leader that we filmed with, the Caparros group, the cartel in Colombia, shortly after there was an attack on her compound while we were filming with her. It was a very scary moment for all of us. And then eventually they were actually taken down, and she's now hiding, and her boyfriend, husband, the father of her children, was captured shortly after we filmed with her.
Wow. Have you ever had to become involved in some of the legal ramifications from the stories you tell? I mean, you're dealing with some pretty dangerous folks. And then, as you just laid out, sometimes there are consequences.
Nothing has ever happened because of what we have filmed. Again, we are very careful to film in situations that makes people feel comfortable with showing us what they're showing us. Our jobs as journalists, as you know, is not to get any particular person in trouble. It is to raise awareness to the issue. So it's much more important for me to show what is happening and to share it with our viewers and with law enforcement and with governments around the world than it is to get a particular person in trouble. I mean, we wouldn't have a show if we did that.
Of course. But I guess on the implications of everything you're illuminating here, what do you hope gets changed coming out of a story? When you have great empathy for some of these characters, you probably leave wanting the best for them in the end. And that's not always the direction their life takes on. How much of that stays with you?
Yeah, all of it. I think, there's this idea that maybe when journalists go home, or that I go home, I stop thinking about them. That's just not the case. I carry all those stories and all those people, and I'm still connected to a lot of them. Again, these are people. Nobody is born wanting to be a criminal. It's not, there are bad people out there. There is evil in the world that absolutely exists. But the vast majority of the people that I meet operating in these black markets are people just like you and I. And that is important because, we can keep on pouring money. The drug business is a good example, the drug war. We can keep on pouring billions of dollars to try to fight this war. But until we get to the root cause of why it exists and who are the operators, who are the people operating in these, who are the traffickers, who's making the drugs, what are their motivations, we will never be able to stop these black markets from existing.
And then at the same time, there have always been black markets, right? It's just that they change the character or how they function or what they're selling.
Absolutely. And there will always be. I mean, we are seeing now there's a black market for COVID vaccines. There's a black market for COVID vaccination cards. There's a black market for COVID masks. Whenever people find a way for a business opportunity, particularly people that don't have other opportunities out there, you'll find ways into it.
So you said you filmed about 5 episodes of the next season. Are you allowed to share any of that with us? Can we get a teaser?
You would kill me. One thing I would say about season 2 mainly, which I think it's always hard once you put out a first season and it does well, and then you're okay, what can we do with season 2 that is like slightly still about black markets, but slightly different, or that we can take it a step further. And I'm really proud of season 2 and my team for that, because I think in many ways, we did actually go deeper and we went wider. We approached subject matters that, again, we wouldn't think are at first, glance black markets, such as white supremacy. Even a story like illegal fishing, I think, is another one I'm incredibly proud of. It's the last episode of the season. And it's one where we went out there, we were looking for people who were fishing illegally. When we found out that 20 to 30% of the seafood that we eat in America is actually illegal. But what we found is that actually the legal fishing industry, the legal commercial industry is damaging the oceans even more than the illegal fishing business. And the story became about that. What are we doing to our oceans? And if our oceans will survive, if there will be any fish left in the future. And yeah.
And on that topic, where did you see the most abuse from that?
We spent a lot of time off the coast of West Africa, where they just don't have as much resources for policing of their oceans. It's very much sort of the perfect crime. Because a lot of times you're out there in the middle of the ocean. It's very difficult to see you committing a crime to catch anyone red-handed, and it is also why it's so easy to, even when you're being a responsible consumer and you think that you're buying the fish from the right sources, it is so easy to sort of launder the illegal fish into the legal market. It really, once that fish is on the boat, you don't really know where it's been fished, where it came from. Right. And it's almost impossible to police. And yeah, it's a wide ocean out there. And unfortunately, we just don't have the rules and regulations in place yet to protect it.
So on the process part of this, you said you were often having to juggle more than one story at once. So, I mean, what is your schedule like? Are you flying one week to West Africa and the next week you're back in California and just ping-ponging topics as well?
Topics we usually tend to tackle one at a time, but then there's always follow-up shoots to do. But yeah, I spend almost half of my time on the road. I'm a mother. I have an 11-year-old son. I get asked very often, how can I do this job? How can I be a traveling journalist, and still have a son? Funny enough, my husband is also a journalist and never gets asked that question. But it's the burden that is put upon us as mothers. But it's I think that what I try to do, and the example that I try to set as a mother, is that there's a whole lot in the world that we don't know, and a whole lot that needs to be there needs to be a light shone on. And so that's the example that I try to set for my son, who also wants to be a journalist, by the way.
Well, and you're providing for your family. I feel like we sometimes need to tell each other that too, because it's working mom is a thing that is said. You never refer to a man as a working dad, right? It's a working mom always. It's a working. Right. You don't hear working dads very often. Right. Yeah. Your work isn't your indulgence; it's part of your existence and supporting of your family too. So I admire that you can travel and do that all at the same time, because that is very difficult.
Yeah, it is. It is very hard. I have an amazing son who understands what I do and never complains, and watches all of the episodes and gives me feedback and tells me,
"Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I think you should have asked this. I hope he's going to be an amazing journalist one day."
Does he pitch you stories?
No, but he doesn't pitch me stories quite yet. But he does tell me, "I think you asked the wrong question," or "I think you're smiling too much," or "You're not smiling enough."
That's funny. So he wants to work in television or in documentary work, or does he wants to be
a journalist / rock star / actor. He's a product of both myself and my husband and California, where he's growing up.
There you go. No, it's it is interesting to juggle family along with that. I mean, do you worry about security now? I know I asked you a version of that with the white supremacy piece, but I do think that the environment broadly for journalists, even when you're not wandering into a crowd like the one you walked into, it's a little less hospitable. Public approval of journalists has been low for some time, but there's a different sort of resentment. Do you feel that even in the work you do?
I do. I mean, particularly in the white supremacy episode, 100%. I think there just is a lack of trust in the media nowadays. And I think that we can continue blaming other people for not trusting us as journalists, but I think there's a lot of work that we as journalists need to also do, and a lot of looking in our own sort of belly buttons and seeing what is it that I can do better as a journalist, and what is it that I'm, and I don't think it's necessarily about objectivity as much as I think is about seeking the truth. I don't think the job of a journalist is to be objective. I think it is to seek the truth wherever that truth takes you. And I try very hard to do that. But emotion is part of it. It's part of my job, and will continue to be. Again, it's the importance of connecting through emotion. If you feel sad for a person, if you feel scared for a person, if you feel happy for them, you'll connect to them, you'll understand them, you'll have a much better way of placing yourself in their shoes for a little bit. And that's the best tool we have in documentary filmmaking. It's all about that. It's all about getting people from very different walks of life to place yourself in those shoes. And I think with a show like Traffic, we have a unique opportunity to start a conversation amongst all of us, which is, what would we do? What would we do if we were born in that situation, in that place, with those conditions? And yeah, that's a very important question that I think we should all ask ourselves constantly.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think there is so much gray that you discover in the course of being a journalist. And you try to understand what people are, the factors that come together to make them make the policy decision or the decision in the direction of their own life. But there is this desire, I feel like, in a very sort of confusing environment that we're living in, for people to have things be very black and white. It's sometimes hard to explain gray.
Right, it is, because it's more comfortable. It's easier, right? It's much easier if you look at the world as black and white. If you see, if you judge other people, they did this horrific thing, I would never be able to do something like that. But just not the case. It's not the world we live in. It's a much more complicated world, and it's also a much more beautiful world because of it. Again, it's this idea that, I say this often, but it's a sentiment that very much stays with me always, wherever I go, this idea that wherever you travel, and no matter how far you travel to the edges of our society, that you can still find people that are relatable and that are redeemable. And that's really a beautiful thing.
Can you ever turn it off? I have a hard time doing that, turning off the reporting instinct.
No, I have a really hard time too. I'm constantly working, even when I'm not in the field. I'm working, looking for story ideas. I'm talking about ideas. It's definitely hard. But it's the only job in the world where they pay you to satisfy your own curiosity.
Yeah,
I complain about it.
No, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, to satisfy your own curiosity. No, so in this next season, as we prepare for watching all the work you've done and the work you are about to do, do you think that you will be able to tackle some of what you teased a little bit there with COVID? I mean, is that going to be something that continues to affect your reporting for the next few years?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we were all hoping that with at the beginning of the summer with vaccinations, that we would see the end of it. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to be the end. But I do think that there's more acceptance to the fact that it is something that is going to be with us for some time. We have to keep on making sure that we're all safe. But it is also that it does have a huge impact on black markets. Again, we're seeing it again and again. Whatever the black market is, whether you're trafficking guns or drugs, or scamming, or organ trafficking, one way or another, they've all been affected by the pandemic and will continue to be so for the coming years, which is, again, I think why a show like Trafficked is so important.
Mm-hmm. No, it is. And you tackle a bunch of those. I'm assuming there's a fake COVID ID card story in there, maybe.
Possibly. I carry this fake $100 bill with me that we filmed for the first episode ever of Trafficked. It was about counterfeit money in Peru. Mm-hmm. And it actually looks so real. And I've been really wanting to get my hands on one of those fake COVID cards so I can compare it to my real one. But it's actually not very hard. I mean, compared to faking banknotes.
They're just pieces of cardboard.
Yeah, I know. You travel to Europe and so many places in the world now, and it seems that they're more advanced technologically. For example, everybody has the QR code. Now we're starting to have it here in the US, but we're still a little far behind.
Yeah, well, and there's a big cultural resistance to that too. And on that point, your travel internationally must have gotten more difficult because of quarantine.
Yeah, you have no idea. I have done, I've been tested for COVID in the wildest, craziest places all around the world. There's also all these places that we found amazing stories and we just couldn't travel to because they were closed down because of COVID. But a lot of the places are opening back up. And so some of the stories that we were hoping to tackle in season 2, we're tackling now in season 3. So that's been good.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that you and your crew continue to do this kind of work safely as well, as we all continue to battle COVID. But I love the work that you do, and I do encourage everyone to tune in and watch this season, because as we've been talking about here, and this is one of the things I love about talking to journalists, is you often have the most interesting conversations about the piece you did on camera when you're talking off camera.
Oh, absolutely. It's also that when you're interviewing somebody and then you turn off the camera and then they say the best thing they've said all day.
I know. And you're like, wait. But I've so enjoyed talking to you today, and admire your work and wish you the best.
Appreciate
so
it.
Thank you very much, Mariana.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks for having me.
For everyone who's enjoyed this, I do want to point out that the finale of season 2 of Trafficked with Mariana van Zeller, it airs February the 2nd at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Pacific on National Geographic. And episodes are also available to you to stream on Hulu. And filming, as we mentioned, for the 3rd season is underway. So stay tuned.